Welcome back to the Doctrine Deep Dive. Today, I want to ask you to do something a little difficult. I need you to strip away, the last 30 years of history.
All of it.
All of it. I want you to forget the insurgencies, forget drones, forget the phrase forever wars. We are transporting you back to 1991.
Okay.
The location is the high desert, but the mood is pure American jubilation.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking ticker tape parades in New York City, yellow ribbons tied around every single oak tree in suburbia.
Right.
And a prevailing, almost intoxicating sense that the United States had just proven itself invincible.
It was a really unique moment in time. You had President George H.W. Bush famously declaring that the United States had kicked the Vietnam syndrome once and for all.
Once and for all.
It felt like a massive turning point. It felt like a technological marvel had just unfolded on live television.
Exactly. But today, we're going to pop that balloon just a little bit. We're going to ask a harder question. Was Operation Desert Storm really the first war of the future?
Or was it actually just the last great gasp of the past? And that is the central tension of modern military history, really. On the surface, Desert Storm looks like the arrival of a revolution in military affairs, precision bombs, stealth fighters, rapid armored maneuvers.
All the things we saw on CNN.
All the highlight reels. But when you peel back the layers, which is exactly what we're doing today, you start to see that it might have been an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at this conflict not just as a victory, but as a massive case study in operational art, logistics, and, crucially, how the rest of the world, specifically Russia and China, reacted to watching the United States military work.
And to guide us through this, we have a stack of incredibly dense, fascinating sources. We aren't just skimming headlines here. We are digging deep. We are pulling from Unhappy Warrior by Rick Atkinson.
A classic.
To get the human drama of the commanders.
Mm-hmm.
We have Air Power and Warfare by Tammy Davis Biddle to decode the strategy of the sky. We've got The Ghosts of Omdurman by Daniel P. Bolger.
Which is, that's the critical skeptical piece we have to get to later. That one is a must-read.
Oh, absolutely.
But we also have Military Doctrine, Lessons from the 1991 Gulf War by Stuart Kaufman, which gives us the Russian panic, essentially.
And we can't forget Unrestricted Warfare by Cao Liang and Wangshang Sui for the Chinese view. We're also diving into The Gulf War at 30 by J. Travis Moger, Deployment, Staging, and Logistics by Richard Stewart.
Crucial for understanding the how.
And Lucky War by Richard Swain.
It is a heavy list, but it covers every angle. It really does.
It is massive. So our mission today is to unpack how the United States ejected the Iraqi army from Kuwait, whether it was truly a revolution, and maybe most importantly, what our potential adversaries learned while they were sitting on the sidelines taking notes.
So where do you want to start with the invasion?
Let's start right at the end, actually, the moment the shooting stopped.
At Safwan.
At Safwan. Rick Atkinson paints this incredibly vivid picture of the armistice meeting at Safwan Airfield. It's March 1991. The fighting is effectively over.
Yeah.
And Atkinson describes the sound before you even see anything. That deep whomp, whomp, whomp of helicopter blades.
Right, the soundtrack of the Vietnam era, but used in a totally different context here.
Exactly. And out of the low surf of oil smoke and dust, because you have to remember, the oil fields are burning at this point. These Black Hawk helicopters touch down.
And out steps Schwarzkopf.
And out steps General H. Norman Schwarzkopf. Atkinson describes him as an American Mars. He's got the muddled fatigues, the 4 black stars, the canteen on his hip. He says he cut the image of a victor.
And Schwarzkopf knew exactly what he was doing. He was a student of history. He absolutely understood theater.
This was a performance.
Oh, 100%. He wanted this meeting at Safwan to feel like the surrender of Japan on the USS Missouri in World War II. He wanted that spectacle of total, unambiguous victory.
So what did that look like on the ground?
Well, he had Apache helicopters circling overhead like birds of prey, tanks lining the runway. He even had a Patriot missile battery set up nearby. It was a message to the Iraqi delegation. You didn't just lose, you were crushed.
It sounds incredibly cinematic, but what I found so compelling in the Atkinson reading is that behind this image of the American Mars and this, confident victor, the actual headquarters back in Riyadh was, miserable.
Yeah, unhappy headquarters is what Atkinson calls it.
Unhappy.
And unhappy is putting it mildly. Atkinson compares it to a fractious family. I mean, you have stories of staff officers being terrified to wake Schwarzkopf up.
Even when there were urgent decisions to be made.
Right. There was a culture of fear, of walking on eggshells around the commander. It wasn't a band of brothers at the top. It was a high-pressure cooker that was about to boil over.
But why was it so tense? I mean, from the outside, they were winning, weren't they?
They were, but you have to remember the context. Schwarzkopf was under immense political pressure. He had to keep a very, very fragile coalition together.
That's a great point. It wasn't just the U.S.
Not at all. You have Western armies. The British, the French and Arab armies, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Saudis, all trying to work in sync. That's a political nightmare. One wrong move, one friendly fire incident, one political misstep could have shattered the entire alliance.
So that tension just trickled down through the whole command structure.
It absolutely did. You had his subordinate commanders who were trying to fight a war while also navigating his temper. It creates this fascinating duality. The confident public face of victory versus the chaotic, stressed reality of command.
So let's set the stage for why this war was happening in the first place. We know the basics. Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait in August 1990.
Right.
But J. Krabs Moger points out it wasn't just about a land grab. It was about debt.
It's almost always about money, isn't it? Iraq was completely broke after fighting Iran for 8 years. I mean, that was a brutal, brutal war of attrition.
And they owed Kuwait money.
Billions of dollars. So Saddam Hussein accused Kuwait of slant drilling, literally drilling diagonally under the border to steal Iraqi oil. He wanted debt forgiveness. He didn't get it, so he invaded.
But for the United States, the response wasn't just about protecting a small nation or about oil. It was about a shift in doctrine.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about the Weinberger Doctrine.
Yes. This is the shadow of Vietnam again, isn't it?
It's always the shadow of Vietnam.
It is. After Vietnam, the United States military did some serious soul-searching. Caspar Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense in the mid-1980s, laid out a set of tests for going to war to ensure we never repeated that mistake.
Kind of a checklist before you commit troops.
That's a good way to put it. 1, is it vital to our national interest? 2, if we fight, do we fight with the clear intention of winning? And 3, do we use overwhelming force?
So no more slow escalation, no more incrementalism.
Exactly. The idea was, never again will we slide into a quagmire with half measures. If we go in heavy, we win decisively, and we leave.
And Desert Storm was basically the textbook application of that.
It was the test case. And it brings us to the first, and maybe the biggest, hurdle. Logistics. It's easy to say overwhelming force, but as you know, amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics.
And Richard Stewart's reading on this is just mind-blowing. He outlines the sheer scale of the problem. You have to move a massive army halfway around the world to a place that, initially, has no base for them.
And you have to do it while worrying that Saddam Hussein might just keep rolling south into Saudi Arabia before you're even ready. The clock is ticking.
Right. There's this terrifying concept Stewart mentions regarding the tooth-to-tail ratio. Can you explain that for us?
Sure. So in military terms, the tooth is your combat power, your tanks, your infantry, the guys actually pulling triggers.
The pointy end of the spear.
The pointy end. The tail is everything that supports them. Mechanics, cooks, fuel trucks, ammo dumps, doctors. Usually you need a massive tail to support the tooth.
Yeah.
But Schwarzkopf was so worried about a potential invasion of Saudi Arabia that he prioritized the tooth. He sent the shooters first, the tanks, the planes, but he held back the tail.
Which is a huge, huge gamble. If you run out of bullets or gas, the tooth stops biting pretty quickly.
It stops biting immediately. Exactly. Major mentions the 82nd Airborne Division arriving early on. They're light infantry. They have rifles and anti-tank missiles, but they're facing heavy Iraqi armored divisions.
So they're outgunned.
Massively. The paratroopers started calling themselves speed bumps.
That is a chilling nickname.
It is. They knew if Saddam attacked, they couldn't stop him. They could only slow him down just enough to be run over.
But Saddam didn't attack.
He didn't. And that hesitation gave time for the logistics miracle to happen. And you can't talk about that without mentioning Major General William Pagonis.
The magician of the desert. Stewart describes him arriving with a tiny staff. I mean, literally 4 people initially.
4 people, a 2-star general and 4 staff members.
And he has to build a support system for hundreds of thousands of troops from scratch. There's this vivid image of a 2-star general sleeping on the ground near some tennis courts because there were no facilities yet.
But he had a secret weapon, so to speak. And that was Saudi Arabia itself.
How so?
Stewart emphasizes that we shouldn't think of this as a primitive desert operation. Saudi Arabia had used its oil wealth to build incredible infrastructure. We're talking modern ports like Ad Dammam, massive multi-lane highways.
So the foundation was there.
The foundation was there. If this war had happened in a country without that infrastructure, the overwhelming force might have starved in the desert. Pergonis brilliantly utilized that host nation support to buy time.
And then there was the Iron Mountain.
The redeployment of Saddam Corps. This is one of the most complex movements in military history. I mean, just try to get your head around this.
Okay.
We had our heaviest armored divisions sitting in Germany, waiting to fight the Soviets in the Fulda Gap. That's what they had trained for their entire careers.
Right, for a completely different war.
A completely different war. Suddenly, they have to pack up everything, every tank, every bullet, every spare part, and move it to the Persian Gulf. Stewart details the chaos of moving that Iron Mountain.
It wasn't smooth.
Oh, not at all. Ships arrived without the right trucks to offload them. Units were separated from their gear for weeks. But they did it. They moved a heavy corps into position to act as the hammer of the ground invasion.
So the stage is set, the logistics are more or less in place, the Iron Mountain has moved. Now, before the tanks start rolling, we have the air war. And this isn't just dropping bombs. This is a whole new theory of warfare being put into practice.
This is where Tammy Davis Biddle's analysis is absolutely crucial. She introduces us to the intellectual architects of the air campaign, specifically a guy named Colonel John Worden. Worden. He had this concept of the enemy as a system, a living organism, visualized as concentric rings.
The 5 rings.
The 5 rings, exactly. So think of it like a biological organism. The center ring, the most vital, is the leadership, the brain, Saddam and his command.
Okay.
Then you have key production, like oil and electricity, that's the metabolism. Then infrastructure, loads and bridges, the veins and arteries. Then the population. And finally, the outer ring, the fielded military forces, the muscles.
The tanks in the desert.
The tanks in the desert. Worden argued that traditionally, armies fight the muscles first clashing tank against tank, but he said that's inefficient. If you hit the center, if you decapitate the leadership or cut the nerves, the body dies. You don't have to fight every single tank if the tank commander can't talk to his boss or get any fuel.
And this theory leads to that group with the cool name, the Black Hole.
Right. The secret planning group in the basement of the Royal Saudi Air Force headquarters. They were a bunch of brilliant, unconventional thinkers. They took Worden's theory and turned it into the actual air tasking order, the daily plan for the air war.
And they shift
a linear approach. Parallel warfare is. We bomb the enemy's national command center, the radar sites, the airfields, the power grid, and the phone lines, all at the exact same minute on day one.
everything, all at once.
Everything, all at once. It relies on stealth and precision munitions. The goal is to overload the enemy's ability to react, to even understand what's happening. It creates total systemic paralysis. The enemy system just freezes because everything is breaking everywhere simultaneously.
And Moger notes that by the time the ground war actually started, the air campaign had been going on for weeks.
38 days.
38 days. So the Iraqi army in Kuwait was just cut off. They were deaf, blind, and hungry.
Completely isolated. Richard Swain, in his book, calls the air war the hammer, and he implies the ground war was just the cleanup operation. And that's a huge debate in military circles to this day.
Did the air war win it, or did it just prep the field?
Exactly. But there is no doubt that when the ground war started on February 24th, the Iraqi army was already a broken force.
So let's get to that ground war, the famous 100-hour war. It's known for being short, but the maneuver itself was absolutely massive. We have the left hook.
Also called the Hail Mary. The plan was brilliant in its geometry. Just picture a map of Kuwait and Iraq.
Okay.
You have the Marines and Arab forces pushing up the coast, straight into the teeth of the Iraqi defenses in Kuwait. That's the jab. It fixes the enemy's attention. They think that is the main attack.
A diversion.
A massive diversion. Meanwhile, far to the west, out in the deep desert where the Iraqis thought no one could possibly operate because there are no roads, no water.
Right.
You have the U.S. 7th Corps and the S Airborne Corps swinging around like a massive door closing to get behind the Iraqi army and cut them off.
Let's talk about the S Airborne Corps first.
Right.
Moger describes the 101st Airborne doing the largest helicopter assault in history.
It is cinematic. We're talking hundreds of helicopters, Black Hawks, Apaches, Chinooks flying deep into Iraq to set up something called Forward Operating Base Cobra.
A gas station and ammo dump in the middle of nowhere.
Essentially, yes. a lily pad for them to leapfrog from. They are cutting off the Iraqi retreat along the Euphrates River Valley. They are moving faster than any army has ever moved before. It's light, fast, and incredibly dangerous.
And then, the heavy hand, the 7th Corps, led by General Frederick Franks. And here is where we get into some real command friction, some real controversy.
Oh, yeah. Rick Atkinson and Richard Swain both discuss this in detail. Schwarzkopf, back in his command bunker in Riyadh, is looking at his maps, and he wants 7th Corps to just smash into the elite Republican Guard immediately. He wants speed, he wants destruction.
He wants the knockout blow.
He wants the knockout blow, and he wants it now. But General Franks, who is actually out there in the sand and the smoke, is more cautious. He wants to synchronize his forces. He creates the famous fist.
The fist.
Think about your hand. If you poke someone with your fingers extended, sending in your divisions one by one, piecemeal, you might break a finger.
You're not applying force effectively.
Right. Franks wanted to close the hand. He wanted to line up his massive armored divisions side by side so they hit the Republican Guard all at once with maximum coordinated violence.
But that takes time.
That takes time to assemble in the desert. So there was this pause. And Schwarzkopf is famously screaming at his staff, "Why have they stopped? Get them moving." And Franks is saying, "I need to align my force before I commit it to the decisive battle."
Swain defends Franks here, doesn't he?
He does, and I think it's a very compelling defense. Swain argues that you cannot just run a multi-division armored corps through the desert at night, like a drag race. If you get strung out, you get defeated in detail, the enemy can pick you off one brigade at a time.
So Franks was being prudent.
Franks was being a professional corps commander, ensuring that when he hit, he couldn't lose. But the friction between the theatrical big-picture commander in the rear and the tactical commander at the front was intense.
And when they did hit, it was a slaughter.
It was a shooting gallery. And this is where the much-hyped technology really comes into its own. Stuart Kaufman notes that the Iraqi T-72 tanks were decent Soviet-era tanks on paper.
But they had a fatal flaw.
They were blind at night. The American M1A1 Abrams tank had thermal sights. We could see their heat signatures through the smoke, through the darkness, through the dust. We were killing them from ranges where they couldn't even see us, let alone shoot back effectively.
And then there's the Global Positioning System, or GPS.
Yeah.
Moger mentions the Slugger.
Ah, the Slugger. The first handheld GPS units, they look like big gray bricks from an 80s movie.
Heavy, I imagine.
Very. But before this, navigating in a featureless desert was a nightmare. You needed compasses, and you literally had to count the rotations of your Humvee's wheels to estimate distance. It was archaic.
And with the Slugger?
With the Slugger, American units could move through a sandstorm at night and arrive exactly where they wanted to be within a matter of meters. The Iraqis assumed the deep desert was a barrier. GPS turned it into a highway for the left hook.
Speaking of highways, Moger brings up the Highway of Death.
Yeah, the retreat from Kuwait. You had Iraqi military forces, but also civilian vehicles, stolen loot from Kuwait City, all jammed on the main highway heading north toward Basra in Iraq.
A traffic jam.
A massive traffic jam. And coalition air power caught them. It was utter devastation. Miles and miles of burned out, twisted metal. And the images from this brings us to the most critical pivot of our whole deep dive.
Right, because looking at all this, the GPS, the stealth, the thermals, the 100-hour victory, it's so easy to say, wow, warfare has changed forever. We have mastered this.
We've cracked the code.
We've cracked the code. But then we read Daniel Bolger's The Ghosts of Omdurman, and he says, not so fast.
This is the article that just stops you in your tracks. It's an absolutely essential piece of military criticism. Bolger compares Desert Storm to the Battle of Omdurman in 1898.
Okay, set the scene for Omdurman for us. I'm not familiar.
So it was the British Army in Sudan, a colonial war, fighting an indigenous force called the Dervish Army. The Dervishes were incredibly brave, fearless warriors.
Right.
But they were fighting with swords and spears against British Maxim machine guns and modern artillery. The dervishes lined up in the open, charged in massive waves, and were just mowed down. It was a complete massacre. The British barely took any casualties.
And Bolger is saying the Iraqis in 1991 were the dervishes.
Exactly. He argues that Desert Storm wasn't a revolution in military affairs. It was a museum piece. We fought an enemy who was strategically and tactically stupid enough to line up in the open, give us 6 months to build up our logistics, and then try to fight a conventional tank battle against a technologically superior force.
So we fought the war we were perfectly designed to fight.
We fought the war we wanted to fight. Our doctrine at the time was called airland battle, designed to fight the Soviets in Europe, and this was a perfect stage for it.
Yeah.
But Bulger says it was a fluke, a historical anomaly.
And he introduces this really powerful metaphor of the Boers.
This is the warning. This is the whole point of his article. The British thought Omdurman proved they were invincible. Then, just a year later, they went to fight the Boers in South Africa.
And the Boers were different.
Totally different. The Boers didn't line up in neat formations. They hid. They used insurgency tactics. They ran away and sniped from cover. They wore civilian clothes. And the British Army, which looked so good at Omdurman, got humiliated for years.
So Bulger's warning is, the future isn't dervishes who stand and fight. The future is Boers who run and hide.
And that is incredibly, chillingly prophetic. He wrote that in 1991, and he's basically predicting the exact nature of the insurgency we'd face in Iraq after 2003.
It chills you to read it now.
It absolutely does. He's saying, don't get cocky from this easy win. Future enemies will watch this tape and say, okay, rule number 1, don't ever, ever fight the Americans in the open desert with tanks.
And that segues perfectly to what the rest of the world was actually thinking as they watched this on TV. Let's look at Moscow first.
The Soviet Union was watching Desert Storm with absolute horror. You have to remember, the Iraqi army was a Soviet client. They were trained by the Soviets. They used Soviet doctrine. They used Soviet equipment, T-72 tanks, MiG fighters.
Their best export models.
Exactly. And the Russians watched that equipment get systematically obliterated on a global broadcast. It was a terrifying advertisement for the failure of their entire military-industrial complex.
Kaufman, in his piece, breaks down the reaction in Russia into two camps, the Ugarkovites and the conservatives.
Right. Marshal Ogarkov had been a voice in the wilderness in the Soviet military for years. He'd been arguing that a technological revolution was coming.
What did he mean by that?
He said the era of mass armies, the classic Russian model of millions of conscripts rushing the field, was obsolete. He argued for something he called reconnaissance strike complexes.
That's a mouthful. What does it mean in practice?
Basically, sensors linked directly to smart weapons. The idea is if you can see it, you can kill it instantly. A satellite sees a tank, and a missile is launched automatically.
So shortening the timeline between detection and destruction.
To near zero. The conservatives in the Soviet military laughed at him. They loved their big, dumb armies.
Right.
Then Desert Storm happened. It was a live-fire demonstration of Ogarkov's entire theory. The Ogarkovites said, see? We told you so.
So Russia realized their entire military model was dead.
It was dead. They realized they needed a smaller, smarter, high-tech force. They needed to see the battlefield and strike instantly with precision. It sent a shockwave through the Russian general staff that, arguably, they're still trying to recover from today.
And what about China? We have this fascinating and kind of strange text, Unrestricted Warfare, by Liang and Wang Shangshui.
This is even more interesting, I think, than the Russian reaction. The Russians saw Desert Storm as a technical problem. We need better tanks and better sensors. The Chinese saw it as a conceptual problem.
Okay.
They used this metaphor of the blind man touching an elephant.
Meaning the United States is the blind man.
Yeah. No, meaning the observers of the war are the blind men. The U.S. Air Force general sees an air war. The Army general sees a tank war. The logistics general sees a supply war. Everyone is touching a different part of the elephant.
I see.
The Chinese authors argue that the United States military is so dominant in conventional force-on-force warfare that you cannot fight them that way. It's suicide. If you fight the United States on their chosen battlefield, you lose.
So what's the solution?
You have to go beyond limits. You have to fight in domains where there are no rules. You have to change what the definition of a battlefield is.
They mention things like economic warfare, right?
They do, but it goes so much deeper than that. They mention George Soros breaking the Bank of England's currency as an act of war. They mention Osama bin Laden and terrorism as a form of warfare. They talk about cyber warfare, using international law as a weapon, something now often called lawfare.
So they're redefining the very idea of war.
They are. They argue that the battlefield is now everywhere. The stock market is a battlefield. The internet is a battlefield. Global media is a battlefield. So while the United States was celebrating its tank victory, Chinese military thinkers were deciding that tanks were becoming irrelevant.
They even called the helicopter the tank Terminator, right?
Yes, they do. They saw the Apache helicopters just annihilating Iraqi armor and realized the era of the heavy tank as the king of the battlefield might be ending. But their biggest, most important takeaway was, don't be the dervish. Don't be the guy standing in the open. Be the ghost. Don't present a target.
So let's pull all this together. We have this incredible tactical victory in 1991. The logistics worked, the air war paralyzed the enemy, the ground war was a masterclass in maneuver. But then we have to ask the hard question, the strategic reflection. Did we actually win?
And that's where Moger and Swain both touch on this strategic ambiguity. We kicked the Vietnam Syndrome. Yes, that was a big domestic political victory.
Right.
We ejected Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. Yes, mission accomplished on that front.
Right.
But Saddam was still in power in Baghdad. The Republican Guard, specifically their best units, like the Hammurabi Division, mostly escaped destruction because of the timing of the ceasefire.
That hard stop at the 100-hour mark.
Exactly. President Bush faced a real dilemma. The highway of death images were starting to appear on television. It looked less like a battle and more like a slaughter. There was immense political pressure, both domestic and from coalition partners, to stop the killing.
So they stopped.
They stopped at exactly 100 hours. It made for a great headline, but strategically, it left a mess. It left a defiant dictator in power who would go on to haunt the region and U.S. foreign policy for another decade.
Swain makes the point that wars rarely solve political
They
problems.
just changed the conditions. It's the famous victory quote again.
From the poem, but what good came of it at last?
And the old man says, "Why that? I cannot tell, but it was a famous victory.
Yeah.
We celebrated the parade, we felt great about ourselves, but we didn't solve the underlying instability of the region. We just kicked the can down the road."
So let's bring it home. What does this all mean for you, the listener, today? Why does a tank war from over 30 years ago matter now?
It matters because we have to be so careful about the lessons we think we learned from history. We spent the 1990s as a military and as a country convinced that technology solves war. We thought if we have better GPS and better bombs and stealth fighters, we win. Period.
And that was the wrong lesson.
It was a dangerously misleading lesson because Bulger was right. The Boers were waiting, the insurgencies, the asymmetric wars, the messy political outcomes. Technology doesn't fix those problems. In fact, it can sometimes make them worse.
So Desert Storm wasn't the template for the future.
Desert Storm was a perfect storm. It was a unique combination of a strategically inept enemy, terrain that was ideal for our way of fighting, and a singular political moment at the end of the Cold War. It wasn't the future of war. It was a one-off. A beautiful, deadly, and ultimately deceptive one-off.
That is a heavy thought to end on. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the doctrine and the illusions of Desert Storm.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just about what happened. It's about what we think happened and how those interpretations end up shaping the next war and the one after that.
And if you want to really understand the last 30 years of conflict,
You have to go back and read Bulger. He saw it coming when everyone else was still watching the fireworks and planning the parades.
check out the full source list in the show notes. From Atkinson to Swain, from Biddle to Liang and Wang, these are truly essential reads. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.